under the guise of morality, law, and order, racialized control through terror. Much of my specialization is in the social psychology of social inequality. And it asks the question, how did we get here and why? Why? The history of terror, lynching, complicates contemporary issues of race, punishment, crime, and justice, mass incarceration, excessive penal punishment, disproportionate sentencing of racial minorities or minoritized, and police abuse of people of color reveal problems in US society that are framed in the terror era. The narrative of racial difference that lynching dramatized continues to haunt us today. Avoiding honest conversation about this history has undermined our ability to build a nation where racial justice can be achieved. These are words that are quoted in Lynching in America, Confronting the Legacy of Racial Terror. We are now on the 3rd edition. The picture that you see before you is an advertisement for a phenomenon that occurred during the lynching era. You see, lynching a Black man, and they were usually Black men, came with an honor status. And so quite often, scores of white Americans would gather, sometimes after church, and bring their picnic baskets and watch as Black men hung and died before them. Quite often, hanging was not enough. Choking to death was not enough. Wherein we see in our history that even as Black men were hung, they were also shot. Their limbs were cut off of their bodies. And then they were burned. Killing us was not enough. The purpose of lynching was not just to punish the initial individual, it was to send a message of terror to entire communities so that they would not attempt to engage in any activity that would challenge the racialized hierarchical order that was established at the very beginning of US society. And so we understand that intergenerational terror, I hope I'm on the right one. Yes. The intergenerational cycle of terror is not just about the lynching. Racialized terror is established in systemic phases that moralized lynching and used it to establish a racialized law and order system that is still approved of today. Still approved of today. As part of my job as a researcher and a professor in sociology, specializing in race and ethnicity, and in stratification and social inequality, I have engaged in 2 racial projects here in Springfield. One traces terror and disenfranchisement from 1908 until today. That is the time of the Springfield riots. The other traces disenfranchisement as a result of segregation, redlining, housing inequalities. I would like to ask you if you understand how terrorizing it is to be poor in America. I believe that we must extend and broaden our definition of terror. We must extend and broaden our definition of violence. Because what has been inflicted upon us, you may move forward, please. What has been inflicted upon us is a system of several types of terror and violence. We have been deprived of social support for overall well-being. Dr. Kamayo already said something to that effect. Our economic well-being, our psychological well-being, our physical well-being, and our social well-being have all been wrecked systematically over time from the very beginning. We are denied financial services, physical health services. We are denied more frequent bus routes that will help us to get from one place to another. We are denied access to better schools. We are denied homeownership opportunities. That is just the material supports that we have been denied. In emotional supports, we have been denied mental health services for youth and adults. We are denied supportive teachers. We are denied the opportunity to have equitable neighborhood gatherings. We are denied. From the informational side of social support, we are denied outlets. Okay? We are denied local libraries. We are denied, and that was supposed to be Black news outlets, right? We are denied special advertising in Black communities. We have several marketing experts among us. Several sociologists go into public relations and marketing. I did. But it became so difficult to challenge my energies toward marketing to my community, because that's not the way the system is set up. The system is set up that if I get paid for a corporation, then I must focus on the corporation's goals, not my people's goals. That is the way our system is set up. We are denied appraisal supports, honest mentoring programs, that take into consideration our cultural heritage. We are denied small business partnerships, denied irrevocably. It is unsustainable. The way that we are denied comes through socialization efforts. Generation over generations of leaders in the United States are socialized to make us understand that the system that is in place is the way it is supposed to be. And therefore, we, as Black people, internalize that socialization and then are trained to turn the scope on our own group members. And if we do not punish our group members, then we lose jobs. Tell me that is not terror. In every course that I teach, I tell my students the same things. There are 5 basic social institutions to any society, and there are at least 4 major socializing agents. Those 5 institutions are the government, religion, the economy, the education system, and the family. The 4 basic Socializing agents are the family, our work and schools, our communities and religions, and the media. How many times do you watch television and understand that a quite racially biased story is being told to you that you don't recognize as truth? How many times? That is a major socializing agent. How many times have Black and white families in Illinois been training their children to disregard people from another racial or ethnic group? What happens at the dinner table at 6 o'clock behind closed doors while you are having family conversations? How do you socialize your children before they go to bed at night? What do you say to your children when you realize that they are dating someone from another race or ethnic group? Because you can say one thing in public, but their behavior shows up in what you tell them in private. The injustice permeates all facets of society. And the purpose is to keep Black people in our place. What is our place according to the systemic rules of order? Our place is always subservience to whiteness. This is the system in which we have been educated. This is the system in which we work. This is the system in which we worship. This is the system that bugs our phones when we're talking to our friends. This is the system that has satellites that catches certain words and phrases in our conversations. This is the system that has television cameras that we don't even know about in our places of employment. We have been forever. 400 years is forever to me. We have been forever conditioned and socialized to know our place and then to train our children to act as if they know theirs. The justification came to us through scientific racism, through the anthropologists and botanists who discovered so many parts of the globe and then classified, remember the word classified different groups of people. Notice that Afrikaners were given a status of relaxed and negligent. Carolus Linnaeus also described us as crafty, slow, foolish, ruled by caprice. If you understand intergenerational socialization, you understand that that catches, that sticks, and it is passed down through families, whether they say it out loud or not. What happens behind closed doors in your households, at the dinner table, and before you go to bed, and as you are traveling to school in a closed car where no one else can hear your conversations? The socialization is what happens. And so scores of people who believe that they are moral and just and righteous have been socializing us to believe that we are less than, that we are insufficient, that we must be subservient to whiteness. That is the justification. We have been infused, all of our systems have been infused with violence specialists. I used to teach a course called genocide. I used to teach a course called genocide. It's no matter. It still comes up in my race and ethnicity class. It still comes up in my social psychology course. It still comes up in, my economic sociology reading. It still comes up in my Sociology of Work and Occupations courses. We are surrounded by violence specialists who develop institutionalized riot systems to convert incidents like peaceful protests into ethnic riots. My research has taken place in Springfield, and we have had a series of peaceful protests after the murder of Sonia Massey. Police departments have been warning their employees that the protesters would be violent. Now, in 1917, after the East St. Louis riots, there was a very peaceful march in New York City. It was a silent march, yet and still, several were arrested. Several were detained under the guise of morality, law, and order. So we have known for quite some time that it does not matter how we present ourselves. It does not matter how smart we are, how many degrees we have, how much money we have. We are still supposed to incorporate the socialization that we will forever be subservient to whites. I told you they were violent. They ought to stop looting. They are criminals. They, us, them, they are barbaric. We are civilized. This makes ethnic cleansing, institutional racism, discrimination, housing segregation, and genocide all the more viable to the onlooking public. I just got some information this week from our local ACLU. In 2023, Black drivers in Springfield were 5.7 times more likely to be stopped by police while driving than white drivers. And plenty of us have been given to understand that, oh no, that happens on the east side of town. No. These drivers were stopped on the west side of town. These drivers were stopped in the north. These drivers were stopped all over Springfield. It did not matter what cars they drove. It did not matter where they were driving. The idea is that they are Black, and therefore they must be dangerous, and even more so if they make a lot of money. Public dehumanization. Move forward. I don't even want to talk about him right now. In teaching the genocide course, we are given to understand that there are 10 stages of genocide. Classification, which I've already told you about with Carolus Linnaeus and Blumenbach. Symbolization, discrimination, dehumanization, an organization and a bureaucracy that makes discrimination legal. Polarization, I'm sure no one has heard about that in this election year. Preparation, persecution. How many times must we endure the stigma of Blackness? There is an inherent stigma that comes with the color of your skin. Why would a man have to mention that he had light skin? Because he knows that it is a part of his status in the United States, and he is persecuted for it. Extermination comes in many forms, just like violence and terror does. You don't have to kill somebody to exterminate them. Were you aware of that? You don't have to kill them. You just have to kill their souls. You just have to kill their spirit. You just have to kill their ability and their wherewithal to stand up to injustice, and you have so much as murdered them. Sonia Massey is no new news. And then after that comes the denial. Now, I would like to tell you that genocide occurs in a linear fashion and goes around in a circle like this, but it does not. Any part of this circular system can happen at any time. And so in 1951, Paul Robeson, W.E.B. Du Bois, several others appealed to the United Nations and said, we cry genocide. This is not new news. We cry genocide. They are not just killing us. They are demoralizing us. They are persecuting us. They are discriminating against us. They are organizing against us. That is genocide. But do you know what the United States did? Because this was still also at the time of the Cold War. So the United States government just quashed it. They used all of their energy. Our government used all of their energy to divert attention away from those individuals and that group and make the United Nations concentrate on the Cold War instead of the genocide that was occurring and still does occur in the United States. And since that time, anytime the United States has tried to call out against China or Canada or any other nation and say, you are practicing genocide, you know what Trudeau says to the United States? Oh, you better hush, because you've been doing this for a long time. But the problem is, regular United States citizens never see that. And so they are left with the socialization and the socializing efforts that take place through the education system, through the media, through the churches, through the families, through the communities. And if you squeeze out the education system so that people will not have access to the truth in the first place, then you have started a psychological warfare that will reproduce racialized inequality over generations. Next slide, please. So then, how are we to examine racial harm to Black communities? We must examine it through a lens of historical and intergenerational trauma. Historical and intergenerational trauma posits that any individual continues to experience the effects of the trauma experienced by their family members in previous generations. Have you heard of vicarious trauma? That is another type of trauma that says that anybody in the community continues to experience trauma as a result of experiences that other communities have. How many of our people are in jail right now? How many of our people have been shot? How many of our people are engaged in local warfare? So many people would like to tell you that the violence that occurs on the east side of Springfield and on the south side and the west side of Chicago and in East St. Louis is our fault. As a part of my research, I have also been listening in and attending Springfield City Council meetings. You would not be surprised at all at how many people, even as recently as a week and a half ago, someone said, it's the parents' fault. blame the parents. If you get your children in line, if you, right, teach your children how to do right, then we wouldn't have all these problems. That's a very interesting concept. And then a white woman got up and said, they need to get back to spanking these children. A beloved woman. She's beloved in the community. They need to get back to spanking. But you know what happens if we start spanking our children again, don't you? Then you've got an institution of social welfare, right? That starts taking our children away from us, much the same ways that they took our children away from us when they snatched them out of our womb when we were coming to this country in the first place. This is a repeat. This is a reproduction of inequality through several different means. We have research that teaches us about the structural factors that help to fuel cultural factors in our society. And we understand that intergenerational trauma is not just passed down through the stories that we tell. Epigenetics will tell us that trauma passes through our reproductive genes. And the National Institutes of Health have published this work. We understand that when whole social groups are deprived of access to resources, like proper schools, like Black teachers, I am so tired, ladies and gentlemen, of teaching in college and having a young Black student tell me that I am their first Black teacher. They are in college. Only 33% of US citizens ever get to college. Only 25% graduate. So are you telling me that when you take my 300 level classes, by the time you are a junior in college, you have not had any Black teachers? Terrorism comes in several different forms. Next slide, please. How are we to right the wrongs? How are we to right the wrongs? As I said, my research has taken place in Springfield. We have entities like the Springfield Sangamon Growth Alliance. I watched as someone in the Springfield Sangamon Growth Alliance made a presentation to the Sangamon County Board. And Springfield is so excited to be getting new companies coming into Springfield. They hire 100, 150 employees. They're so excited. One thing I did not hear that presenter mention is whether any of those employees were going to come from the east side of Springfield. One thing I did not hear that person mention was what would be the educational requirements of those new employees. One thing I did not hear that speaker mention was what would be the racial makeup of those 150 employees. So while the city of Springfield is celebrating this new expansion and this economic development, we, the Black people in Springfield, are still left in terror. Does anybody know how terrorizing it is to be impoverished? The 186th School Board is still operating under a consent decree that was delivered to them in 1976. You're looking at me telling me it's 74. I talked to Dr. Betts, it was official. Tell me, Bart. It's 76. It's okay, I'm looking at you, that's fine. There you go, but it was put into action. That was when the suit started. It's put in action in 76. okay? I'm a teacher. I look at my students, right? And whether it was 74 or 76, that's still too long. They're still under that consent decree. The fire department, the police department, we have beautiful officers here. Ask them where their beat is. Ask them if their beat is on the west side of Springfield. Quite often in my research, I talk to regular people, and they will tell me about their experiences trying to deal with the school board. But you understand, if the city and the state and the nation has been involved in this type of reproduction of social inequality that terrorizes our citizens for this long, I don't even blame the quote-unquote bad kids in 186. Do you know why? Because if we have passed down terror through our genes for over 419 years, those babies are coming out of the womb revolting. They are coming out of the womb revolting. They can feel that something is wrong. They have felt it in their mother's wombs. They can feel it in their families, in their households. They understand that this is wrong. Have you ever spoken to a black boy who has dropped out of school at the age of 16? He is actually quite intelligent. Have you ever spoken to the class clown? They actually understand. Plenty of our children are suspended at 4 times the rate of white children and diagnosed with something called oppositional defiant disorder. What is it? They disagreed with the teacher. They spoke up too much. They raised their hands too much. They asked too many questions. Well, that seems quite interesting to me, that our white children are raised to question and our black children are raised to stay quiet. They are coming out of the womb revolting. I do not blame them, and I will not sign off with anyone who blames the parents. How many times do we have to say that Black Lives Matter? And then hear someone else say that all lives matter. Now, I'm going to talk about that person whose picture that I saw up here before. I live in Ward 6. And my alderman is Jennifer Notoriano, white woman. She is the only white member of our city council who has undertaken anti-racism training through Crossroads. The only one. And she came out of that training swinging. Okay? And what she said was that you cannot continue to say all lives matter if you don't act like all lives matter. Well, do you know what that man whose picture I showed y'all? You know what he said? We work very hard to make sure that we are protecting all lives in Springfield. Now, you know what? You just said all lives matter. How many times do we have to say that Black Lives Matter and have a retort of all lives matter? The whole reason that we are saying that Black Lives Matter is because they do not. Not in your policy, not in your procedures, not in your actions, not in the way you treat our children, not in the way you turn down our loans, still not in the way that our black business go before your city council and get denied for TIF funds, CDBG funds, home funds. Black lives don't matter to y'all. Why don't you just say the truth and stop lying to us? Stop lying. Next slide. So in my courses, I say these things. I'm quite frank in all of my courses. As I have said, I'm me wherever I go. And so I ask students to respond to some of the things that I'm saying. Earlier this year, as a part of one of our research studies, I and Dr. Devin Hunter and Peter Cole and Tandra Thomas in East St. Louis, we took a few people to the Equal Justice Initiative museums. Roger came with us, Mr. Elion. And that week I had been discussing Abraham Lincoln and whether or not he really freed the slaves. So then I'm an associate professor, and I had a white professor who was much higher in rank than me to tell me, thank you very much, that I was inaccurate in my teaching. And I told him, you're not a sociologist, you don't understand history, and you're not a black woman, and you don't understand history from the perspective of a black woman, so I'm not gonna come in your class, and you need to stay the hell out of mine. Come out, did it. He cussed. I can cuss too. I asked my students for responses. One student said, when I learned that he, Abraham Lincoln, wasn't the hero I believed him to be, I was disappointed. I had assumed that the U.S. was no longer racist because it had all these great leaders. I was wrong. The truth is always out there as long as you question things and put on your sociological goggles. At any age, you can see how inequalities form in our societies, whether in the workplace, among friends, or even within our own homes. If we acknowledge these inequalities and act on them, the future might be brighter for less powerful groups. That was a 20-year-old. If you teach them the truth, they're gonna come out with a different mindset. Here's something else that another student said. Misinformation affects how we form our views on various issues, including stereotypes and victim blaming. Once we fully understand what is going on, perhaps even those in higher social classes with higher socioeconomic status, I am teaching them this, will change their ways, giving people a chance in life, protecting their voices and opinions, valuing each other's worth, and treating one another with equality. These are students. These are 20-year-olds. Next slide. I need for everybody to understand that as we work on healing, one of the last things I will say is that I'm working with SIU School of Medicine and Memorial Health to devise healing circles. And every time I start out with the truth, because you cannot heal without accountability. And this is where reparations comes in. Of course we want our money back, but what we would much, much rather prefer is that you get these systems in order. That you get the education system to teach the truth. That you get our government officials to stop. I've got, one of them just left. You've got 2 black aldermen that are here today. They have been asking the city of Springfield for a list of minority contractors for at least 1 year. Should sound simple, but the city has not revealed it to them. How difficult, how awful must it be to be in a space of leadership in the city and still be disregarded so boldly, so fiercely, so hatefully. I would like for us to consider that healing does require accountability, willingness, and action. And unless you find a way to change the reproduction of inequality, then there will be no healing in the land. Thank you very much for your time.